Georgia, 1873. A time when the South was recovering from war and freedom was more of a word than a reality. A woman of wealth and a boy of secrets were about to defy the rules of a world still chained by its past. She was 18, trained to obey, to smile, to be the perfect daughter. But inside she burned with a fire no wealth or etiquette could contain. And then he arrived. $500 a month. Fair servant, a secret. But what her father bought could not be measured in coins. It could only be felt, in heartbeats, in whispers, in stolen moments of passion that would change everything. Georgia, 1873. The iron gates of Whitmore Manor groaned as the carriage rolled along the long gravel driveway. Cotton fields stretched endlessly on either side, pale and ghostly under the late afternoon sun, bending gently in the breeze like the silent witnesses of a past that refused to die. Slavery was over by law, but the memory lingered thick as dust and heavy as the air before a storm. Clara Whitmore sat perfectly poised inside the carriage, hands folded delicately in her lap, eyes calm, her posture impeccable. To anyone looking, she was the picture of composure, the obedient daughter, freshly returned from boarding school, armored in manners and expectations. Her chin was high, her voice measured, her smile polite. Every movement was a mask of control. But beneath that polished exterior, a fire simmered. Books had promised freedom, whispered of distant worlds and choices carved by one's own hand. But knowledge alone could not free her from the cage she had been born into, a cage of silk curtains, golden chandeliers, and a father who believed in owning obedience as much as property. The carriage halted at the steps of the grand porch. Judge Edwin Whitmore stood there, tall and unyielding, framed by white columns and the late sun. His silver beard caught the light, casting long shadows over his stern, unrelenting face. His eyes scanned her like a hawk, precise, calculating, claiming. "Clara," he said, voice smooth but edged with command, "you've grown." "Yes, father," she murmured, voice small, careful. Even 8 years after the Confederacy's defeat, the judge ruled his household as if the South had never fallen. Obedience, discipline, hierarchy, and fear were the law here, and Clara had been taught to obey without question. That evening, under crystal chandeliers and across a dinner she barely touched, he delivered his plan with surgical precision. "I've made arrangements for you," he said. "You will have a personal attendant." Clara froze, hands suspended mid-air. "I do not need—" "It is decided," he interrupted, the knife slicing through roasted meat punctuating the finality of his words. "He is intelligent, obedient, and discreet." The word discreet hovered between them like smoke, laden with dark promise. "His name is Jonah Reed." That night, under the soft glow of candlelight, Clara spoke to Miss Ruth, the housekeeper who had raised her with more love than her own mother ever had. $500 a month, she whispered, incredulous. Miss Ruth's hands paused, resting on the delicate lace of Clara's corset. "That boy is not just a servant," she said softly. "What is he then?" Miss Ruth met her gaze in the mirror, eyes shadowed with knowledge. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "the one wearing chains holds more power than the one holding the key." The next morning Jonah Reed arrived. Clara observed him from the upstairs landing, her pulse quickening. He was young, perhaps 17 or 18, tall and lean, with skin like dark chocolate and eyes that met hers without submission or fear. His clothes were simple, worn at the edges, yet his posture held quiet strength and command. He filled the room without effort. No bowing too deep, no eyes averted. "You understand the arrangement?" Judge Whitmore asked. "Perfectly, sir," Jonah replied. His voice was calm, measured, smooth and confident, carrying the kind of quiet power that made Clara's chest tighten and lips bitten. "I attend to Miss Clara from sundown to sunrise, 6 days a week, $500 paid monthly. And—" "Discretion?" Jonah's eyes glinted. "I understand discretion very well, Judge." Clara felt it like a jolt, a current tracing her spine. He was not just a servant. He was a force she could not yet name. That night, the first knock came at her door. She hesitated, breath caught before opening. He stood there holding a book, quiet and polite, but the air between them was charged. Something unspoken hummed, something dangerous, urgent, intoxicating. "Miss Clara," he said softly, "your father asked me to keep you company." "I don't need company," she snapped, sharper than intended. "Neither do I," he replied, evenly. "But we are both here." His honesty unsettled her. Slowly she stepped aside, letting him enter. At that night, Miss Clara was wearing a loose gown like she was trying to get into her bed, that suddenly Jonah arrived at her door. Her room was a cathedral of wealth. Silk curtains, polished furniture, books stacked like mountains. Jonah's eyes roamed, careful yet lingering, a look that traced her jaw, the curve of her neck, the flutter of her lashes, under her chin the beautiful curves. "You like to read," he said softly, almost reverently. Her heart leapt. A flutter she hadn't felt in years. "Austen Bronte." He pulled a hidden book from the shelf. "Thoreau. How did you—" "I pay attention," he said low, teasing. "It keeps me alive." He sat near the window, the moonlight painting silver along his features. Clara felt truly seen for the first time, not as a daughter, not as property, but as a mind ablaze, a heart capable of wanting and daring. Night after night, Jonah returned. Their conversations grew, layered like the twilight that draped the quay. Manner. Then one night destiny intervened. Their hands reached for the same book, fingers brushed. The room seemed to stop. Breath caught, heartbeats synced. "This is wrong," Clara whispered. "Yes," Jonah said quietly. And yet he did not move. Line had been crossed and neither could turn back. Weeks passed, conversations spilling into the early hours. Laughter, confessions, whispers. Each night a layer deeper, a pull impossible to resist. Clara realized what her father had truly paid for. Not obedience, not companionship, but a power that could never be measured. A love dangerous, consuming, and alive. Then the first storm arrived. Her father announced her engagement to a man cruel and older. She cried until Jonah came, the door swinging open like the world itself had shifted. He pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face to his chest, trembling. "I can't marry him," she sobbed. "Then don't," Jonah whispered fiercely. "You are not owned. Do I have a choice?" "Yes," he said, voice low and burning. "Make one." Their lips met, slow, hesitant, trembling, as if the moment itself had weight. It was not rushed, not hungry, but heavy with everything they had held back for so long. Years of longing, denial, and unspoken desire folded into that single breath between them. The kiss lingered, soft and uncertain at first, then steadier, carrying the ache of all the nights they had pretended not to feel this pull. It was a quiet surrender, a promise made without words, a confession neither had ever dared to voice aloud. When they finally parted, their foreheads rested together, eyes closed, breaths unsteady. Nothing more was needed. That kiss alone had changed them, unforgettable, consuming and irreversible. They pulled apart, gasping, trembling. "This will destroy us," Jonah whispered. "I've been dead inside for years," Clara said, fingers tracing his face. "You make me feel alive." That night, they ignited a fire neither could extinguish. The days at Whitmore Manor passed under a careful veil of normalcy. By daylight, Clara moved through the house like the perfect daughter, polite, composed, quiet. She nodded when required, kept her gaze lowered before her father, smiled when visitors came and laughed at the shallow jokes of cousins who thought the war was already buried. But the minute the sun dipped toward the horizon, everything changed. At sunset, Jonah Reed knocked at her door. The air between them was no longer tentative. Every glance carried electricity, every step toward one another a choice loaded with risk. Clara's pulse jumped before she even spoke. Jonah's eyes, dark and steady, lingered a heartbeat too long on her neck, her hair, the curve of her shoulder. Every small brush of fingers, every accidental touch, sent a shiver down her spine she couldn't name. They didn't rush into passion. They didn't need to. They learned to savor it, layer by layer, whisper by whisper. One evening Jonah brought Her a letter he had intercepted, a private communication from one of her father's business partners. He laid it on the desk, his fingers brushing hers. "Your father wouldn't want you reading this," he murmured. "I like danger," Clara said softly, the corner of her mouth tilting. Jonah's gaze caught hers. The room was dim, candlelight painting gold along his strong features. The tension wasn't in the words, but in the stillness between them, the charged air that made every breath feel like an invitation. He leaned slightly closer, shoulder brushing. Hers, and Clara felt the warmth, the proximity, the magnetic pull between them. Her hand twitched, wanting to linger, to feel the firm line of his arm, the strong sweep of his chest under his simple shirt. Instead, she drew in a breath, letting the tension hang like a secret promise. Tonight it was eyes and words. Tomorrow, who could say? Weeks later, as a storm rolled across the fields, the wind rattling the shutters, they huddled near the fireplace. Rain streaked the windows like silver tears. "Jonah," Clara whispered, voice trembling with the fear of discovery. "What if someone finds out?" He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining. "Then we fight," he said softly. "We survive. But the truth is ours alone." Clara's chest heaved. Every word from him was a brush of silk against her skin, a tender caress she had not expected. Her lips hovered near his in the firelight. She closed the distance, soft, trembling, brushing a kiss along the corner of his mouth. Jonah's response was subtle, almost reverent, a tilt of his head, the ghost of his lips against hers. It was a kiss that promised more, whispered of patience and hunger both, a delicate prelude to passion. They broke apart, hearts racing. This was no longer simple desire. It was strategy, trust, and surrender all wrapped into one. One afternoon, Clara found Jonah in the garden, tending to the roses. Sunlight dappled his skin, glinting off sweat on his brow. "You know," she said, walking closer, "I don't think anyone else has ever noticed these flowers." "They are beautiful," he said softly, turning toward her, eyes warm. "But not as much as someone I know." Clara's breath caught. He stepped closer, fingers brushing hers as he reached for a bloom. The contact was electric, a simple touch carrying weeks of longing and restraint. They laughed quietly, leaning closer to avoid being seen by passing servants. Every shared glance, every whispered word in the golden light of late afternoon became an act of rebellion, a secret between two hearts burning dangerously in a house that demanded obedience. By nightfall, the storm of their emotions was undeniable. A single brush of his hand on her back as he guided her inside made her knees weak. Jonah's hands roamed slowly, reverently, tracing the slope of her shoulders, the curve of her waist, the gentle swell of her chest, memorizing every line as if committing her to memory, every movement deliberate, every touch a question and an answer all at once. One night, as the wind howled and the manor creaked, Clara invited Jonah into her room under the pretense of reading together. "Your father would kill me if he knew," she whispered, the thrill of danger sharpening her senses. "I know," Jonah said, voice low, steady. His hand lingered on hers, tracing circles, sending warmth up her arm. This time they did not hesitate. His lips found hers in a kiss, deeper, hungrier, full of all the weeks they had denied themselves. It was urgent but tender, desperate, yet reverent. Every second a claim, a surrender, a declaration. Her hands traced the curve of his back, his chest, memorizing the strength he offered, the safety he represented. She shivered against him, lost in a storm of sensation and emotion, feeling for the first time what it was to be wanted completely and without apology. When they finally parted, they clung to each other, foreheads touching, breaths mingling. Neither needed words. The electricity of their union spoke for them. Over the next weeks, their intimacy evolved in new, careful ways. A brush of fingers over a book page while reading, a hand resting on her waist while adjusting her hair eyes, locking across a crowded room, holding a private conversation no one else could see. Each moment was sensual, unique, a new brushstroke on the canvas of desire, building tension without ever repeating a scene. Jonah's intelligence became part of the seduction. Whispered debates, subtle teasing, and shared secrets became a form of intimacy as powerful as a stolen kiss. Clara, in turn, explored her agency. She leaned into the thrill of the forbidden, learning to trust herself, her choices, and the man who had captured her mind as surely as her heart. And then, the night came. The one they had both sensed approaching, but never named. The room was quiet. Candlelight flickered softly, painting the room in gold and shadow. Their bodies were bare, but not suddenly. It had been a slow, deliberate process, undressing each other like a quiet, intimate ritual. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she loosened the tie of Jonah's shirt, fingers brushing over the lean strength of his chest and shoulders. He leaned into her touch, sighing softly, eyes closed, letting her explore, his hands guiding hers with gentle pressure, teaching her without words. Jonah's fingers found the clasp of her gown, undoing it slowly, deliberately, letting the soft fabric slide over her shoulders, over the curves of her back, exposing the gentle swell of her waist and the slope of her hips. Each movement was tender, careful, full of reverence. Clara pressed closer to him as he helped remove the last folds, her hands tracing the warm lines of his torso, memorizing the subtle curves of muscle beneath her fingers. Jonah leaned down, his lips brushing over her shoulder, her collarbone, a trail of teasing warmth. She responded instinctively, her lips tracing the gentle swell of his chest, soft and deliberate. It was playful, intimate, a shared language of heat and trust, each kiss and brush of tongue a confession of closeness and surrender. Their bodies molded together, thighs tangling, arms curling, hips pressing in perfect rhythm. Clara's hands roamed over his shoulders, along the line of his back, memorizing the strength and warmth of him, while Jonah's fingers traced the gentle curves of her waist, the swell of her hip, the delicate slope of her chest. Every brush, every shift, every sigh of breath was a conversation of trust and desire. Jonah returned the gesture, his lips tracing the top of her chest, soft and teasing, leaving a trail of warmth that made her tremble. Clara gasped softly, then pressed her body closer, legs and torso curving against him, heartbeats synchronizing, limbs entwining in a private rhythm only they could feel. They curled into each other, fully entwined, their bodies mapping and memorizing each curve, every line of skin, every subtle shiver and pulse. Foreheads pressed together, noses brushing, breaths mingling, hearts beating in tandem. Hands explored gently, caressing, pressing, tangling. A dance of trust and surrender, a full union of warmth, closeness, and intimacy. The candlelight danced over the elegant curves of their forms, the slope of Clara's shoulders, the swell of her hips, the gentle rise of her chest, the lean strength of Jonah's torso, the soft flex of his arms, the warm lines of his back. Every movement, every brush of skin was a wordless confession, a merging of bodies and souls that went far beyond physical touch. They shifted together, twisting and curling, pressing, tangling, exploring, entering one another in the way of bodies, fully aligned, fully trusting, fully present, lips, skin, hands and hearts all intertwined. Each sigh, each shiver, each playful trail of lips across a chest or shoulder deepened the connection, a full, tender and passionate communion, as if their bodies themselves spoke the language of love and devotion. When at last they lay still, limbs curled, skin warm and slick with candlelit sweat, hearts still racing, they were utterly merged in intimacy, every curve, every line, every shiver, a testament to the trust, desire and love they had for each other. They whispered nothing. It was not necessary. The act of undressing each other had been a declaration in itself, a slow surrender, a playful and tender exploration, a perfect prelude to the merging of hearts, warmth, and bodies. Limbs tangled, breaths shared, touches lingering, every shiver and heartbeat reinforcing the closeness that now existed between them. Meanwhile, shadows gathered. Rumors spread quietly among the servants and visiting relatives. Whispers of too close and inappropriate drifted through the hallways. Judge Whitmore felt the change, the tension that had been building in his household. He could sense it in the way Clara moved, the way Jonah's eyes lingered on her, calm and fearless. One afternoon the judge arrived early, his boots striking the polished floor like thunder. Jonah was near Clara's door, holding a book she had asked him to read aloud, his posture calm, respectful, but his eyes sharp, aware of every step outside the door. The moment Judge Whitmore stepped into the hallway, anger flashed across, his face like lightning, sharp and sudden. Jonah froze, heart tightening, not out of fear of himself but for Clara. The judge's gaze was a storm, cold and unyielding, sweeping over them both with the weight of authority and suspicion. "Out," the judge snapped, voice cracking with fury. "Now!" Jonah's chest rose steadily, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, sir, Miss Clara asked me to stay." The sound of the judge's slap against Jonah's cheek echoed through the hall, sharp, humiliating, resonating with the finality of control. Blood appeared at the corner of Jonah's lip, but he did not flinch, did not yield. He stood straight, shoulders squared, eyes meeting the judge's without retreat. Clara appeared then, her heart hammering, her hands trembling, rushing between them. "Stop!" she cried. You dare hurt him!" Judge Whitmore's face contorted with rage. "You dare defend him? You dare shame this family? He's not a thing." Clara's voice shook but rang with clarity. "He's a man who has taught me what freedom of thought truly means, and what loyalty looks like." Jonah spoke quietly, deliberately, each word measured. "Before you do something you cannot undo, sir, there are things you should know." The judge froze, the storm in his eyes faltering for the first time. "I know about the bribes," Jonah continued, voice unwavering, "the convict leasing deals, the letters you burned." Silence swallowed the hallway. Clara stared at him in shock and awe. "You kept copies?" Jonah nodded once, calm, collected. "Detailed copies. Every contract, every ledger, every correspondence. You assumed I wouldn't understand. You assumed I would fear, but I do neither." Judge Whitmore's face drained of color, the weight of revelation pressing like a vice. Jonah's voice was quiet, almost gentle but firm. "I'm not threatening you, sir. I'm negotiating. The kind of negotiation you respect, the one built on skill, intelligence, and consequence." For the first time, the balance of power shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but in the quiet, sharp moment of truth, the boy he thought he owned was no longer powerless, and the daughter he believed obedient had found her own voice. The line had been drawn, and deep within, Clara and Jonah both realized their connection was no longer just desire. It was survival, partnership, and trust forged in fire. The house did not sleep after that night. Judge Edwin Whitmore moved through his own home like a caged predator, restless, vigilant, every creak of the floorboards setting his nerves on edge. He spoke little, watched everything, as if the walls themselves whispered secrets to him. But Jonah Reed moved through the same rooms with quiet assurance, every action deliberate, every glance measured, outwardly obedient, inwardly defiant. By day he continued his duties with care. He spoke politely, never raised his voice, never challenged the judge in public. Yet in every calculated word and movement, he displayed a subtle dominance that unsettled the patriarch. A quiet strength, a restrained fire, a mind that missed nothing. By night, Jonah returned to Clara's room, but now every stolen moment carried a sharp, electric urgency. Every glance, every brush of fingers, every whisper of breath was amplified by the knowledge that danger lurked just beyond the door. The forbidden act of love had become a lifeline, a defiance, and a sanctuary all at once. Clara opened the door, and the moment their eyes met, the world outside ceased to exist. He stepped inside, and they closed the distance between them without hesitation. Hands found each other immediately, fingers tangling, thumbs brushing across palms, sending tiny shocks of warmth through their bodies. Jonah pressed her gently against him, feeling the soft curve of her shoulders, the gentle slope of her back, the swell of her waist pressed into his chest. Clara shivered at the heat of him, lips brushing his neck, collarbone, and finally, teasing the rise of his chest with soft kisses and lingering licks that made him gasp quietly. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, arms wrapping around his waist as their bodies molded together naturally. Limbs tangled in ways that felt inevitable, knees brushing, thighs pressing. shoulders curled together, every inch of skin alive with heat and sensation. Jonah's hands traced the line of her spine, lingered over her hips, while Clara's fingers mapped the gentle planes of his torso, memorizing muscle and warmth with reverent curiosity. Every kiss, every touch, was a dialogue without words, a play of desire, trust, and need. Jonah tilted his head, pressing a soft trail of kisses along her temple, neck, shoulders, and then her chest, while Clara responded in kind, lips brushing over the top of his chest again, teasing, intimate, playful. Each touch was a claim, a surrender, a shared heartbeat in the quiet, candlelit room. They sank onto the bed together, limbs entwining further, hips pressing, arms curling, bodies folding into one another with perfect rhythm. The danger outside made each movement sharper, each sigh heavier, each lingering kiss more urgent. Every inch of skin against skin, every shiver and gasp, became a protest against a world that sought to keep them apart. Clara tilted her head, pressing herself fully against Jonah, and he responded by holding her tighter, hands exploring the gentle curves of her back, waist and thighs. They moved together like water, bodies pressing, shifting, curling, a silent dance of intimacy and trust, their warmth and closeness a sanctuary from the cold, watchful world outside. Even in stillness, the intimacy was alive. Foreheads pressed. Together, breaths mingling, hearts racing in perfect synchrony, limbs tangled, bodies curved together, and every lingering touch a promise of protection, desire, and devotion. In that night, nude, warm, and fully entwined, they were both utterly vulnerable and completely whole. The forbidden act of love was no longer just defiance. It was their lifeline, their sanctuary, and the purest truth they could ever hold. 1. Stormy evening, rain thrashing against the windows. Clara and Jonah sat close on the floor by the fireplace, the scent of wet earth drifting in from the garden. "Promise me something," Clara whispered, her lips trembling, her fingers clutching. "The fabric of his shirt, what is it?" Jonah asked, leaning closer, careful not to crush her in his embrace, but close enough that the heat between them burned like the flames before them. "If something happens, if you have to run, don't hesitate." Jonah brushed her damp hair, back gently, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I won't run without you," he said, voice low and steady, yet vibrating with a barely contained intensity. "That's not what I asked." She pressed closer, inhaling his warmth. "I won't leave you behind," he whispered. Her lips found his in a slow, trembling kiss, soft at first, then building, deep and urgent, as though trying to etch their connection into the night itself. Every sigh, every shiver, every heartbeat whispered of their fear, their devotion, and the dangerous pleasure of being caught. They broke apart only when the fire burned low, breaths mingling, hearts racing. Each glance now carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken confessions. A week later, Clara found Jonah alone in the garden, the late sun painting gold across his skin. "You always notice things," she said, brushing her fingers across the petals of a rose he had trimmed. "They're beautiful," he said, stepping closer, "but not as beautiful as someone I know." The words made her pulse jump. He reached out, hand grazing hers in a deliberate, lingering touch. Electricity shot through, her like lightning, soft, dangerous, irresistible. They laughed quietly, bending together over the rose bushes, heads almost touching. Every accidental brush of shoulder, every whispered word carried a weight of intimacy, a language of longing spoken without sound. As dusk fell, their fingers entwined, and Clara leaned into him, her breath warm on his neck. Jonah responded, subtly, hands resting lightly on her waist, drawing her closer without breaking the unspoken rule of restraint. The danger made every touch sweeter, every kiss impossible to resist. Night descended like a velvet curtain, and Jonah returned with documents and ledgers he had secretly compiled. They sat together on the floor of Clara's room, candles flickering, moonlight spilling over their papers. "I've mapped everything," Jonah whispered, tracing a finger along the contracts. "Every debt, every bribe, every letter. Your father won't see it coming." Clara shivered, leaning against him. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, fingers brushing the curve of her neck and chest. The heat of his body, the scent of him, the intimacy of shared secrets made her. "Paul, sleep, I trust you," she murmured. "You are not safe," he said softly, lips grazing her temple. "I do not know what will happen tomorrow, but tonight you are mine." Their kiss was long, slow, and feathered with teasing urgency. Tongues brushing, hands exploring just enough to inflame desire without removing the thrill of danger. Every movement was new, every caress a revelation, every sigh a confession. The threat came from the outside, crueler than whispers or glances. Senator Caldwell, humiliated and vengeful over the broken engagement, had investigated Jonah's past. The truth was explosive. Jonah Reed was not just a former slave. He was the illegitimate son of a wealthy plantation owner, the same man whose widow the senator had recently married. Federal marshals arrived at Whitmore Manor carrying chains and a warrant. Fraud, blackmail, violation of racial laws. Clara watched, horror-struck, as Jonah was shackled, real iron biting into his wrists. His eyes met hers, calm, steady, a silent promise. "Trust me, survive this, and we will live." Judge Whitmore froze, realizing too late the leverage they now wielded. The boy he thought he owned was untouchable in ways he hadn't anticipated. That night, Clara could not sleep. She found Jonah's empty chair by the fire and sank to the floor beside it, shivering, in fear and longing. He returned hours later, bruised but alive. She ran to him, threw herself into his arms and kissed him, urgent, desperate, fiery, a release of weeks of fear, longing, and suppressed desire. "Don't ever leave me," she whispered, burying her face in his chest. "I won't," he said, holding her as though the world outside could not touch them. Every touch, every embrace, every stolen second became a rebellion, a declaration of love that no chain or threat could undo. They explored one another in the shadows of the room, new sensations, new touches, hands tracing lines of muscles and skin with reverence, lips mapping the contours of forbidden territory. Every kiss was a stolen treasure, every sigh a defiance of a world that would see them apart. In the following days, power shifted quietly. Jonah, once thought a servant, became the architect of the manor's secrets. He moved with confidence, managing estates, contracts, and debts, all while keeping Clara safe. Clara's love evolved, too. No longer merely desire, it became trust, partnership, and shared strategy. Their intimacy reflected this: soft caresses while reviewing ledgers, lingering touches when they whispered plans, kisses that tasted of triumph and survival. Even Judge Whitmore began to see it. The boy he thought he could control had become indispensable, a presence too clever, too skilled, too human to be dismissed. On storm-laden nights they stole further into each other's hearts, fingers intertwined while plotting against the senator breaths, mingling over candle-lit documents, kisses that shifted. From teasing to all-consuming, every encounter was different, evolving. From intellectual seduction to desperate urgency, from tender confession to fiery passion. Clara pressed against Jonah as he whispered strategy, every word a caress, every glance a promise. Their bodies and minds were entwined, each touch carrying the thrill of danger and the certainty of love. By the time the threat of arrest and exposure had passed, they were no longer simply lovers in secret. They were partners in survival, in rebellion, and in passion. The danger had passed, but the manor never returned to silence. The Whitmore estate thrummed with life, quiet yet electric, as if the walls themselves remembered every secret, every kiss, every stolen night of passion. Jonah Reed moved with confidence, now managing the estate with brilliance, discretion, and the quiet power that had saved them both. Clara moved through her world differently too. The girl who once obeyed without question had grown into a woman who could command, who could choose, who could love without fear, and love they did, differently now, deeply, deliberately. Their intimacy was no longer stolen, desperate, or fleeting. It was chosen, unshakable, and layered with the weight of years and trials endured together. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Clara's bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair while Jonah poured coffee at the small table by the window. He set a cup beside her, and their fingers brushed as she took it. A simple touch, but it carried decades of shared history, comfort, warmth, and a thrill that never faded. "Good morning," he said, voice low, eyes bright with affection. "Good morning," she replied, leaning forward, lips brushing his, cheek in a fleeting, tender kiss. No urgency, no fear, just the quiet joy of being together. They laughed over small jokes, whispered about trivial matters, and yet every glance, every touch, held the memory of nights when every kiss had been a rebellion, every touch a risk. In the afternoon they strolled through the gardens Jonah had carefully tended over the years. The roses bloomed in careful order, fragrant and vibrant. He reached for her hand, fingers curling around hers. Their walk was unhurried, every step a testament to trust, partnership, and a love that had survived fire and chains. "I never thought we'd have days like this," Clara whispered, head resting on his shoulder as they paused by the fountain. "Neither did I," Jonah replied, lips brushing her hair. The touch was intimate, tender, a contrast to the desperate passion of years past. She tilted her face to his, eyes searching, lips soft. Their kiss was slow, deliberate, a gentle exploration of a love that had matured, but never lost its fire. Night fell, and the manor quieted. They sat together by the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket, the glow reflecting in their eyes. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked, fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Jonah smiled, brushing a hand over hers. "Nothing," he said. "Every risk, every stolen moment, every danger, it brought me to you." She leaned against him, lips brushing his shoulder, tracing kisses along his collarbone. Each touch was deliberate, a dialogue of love, trust, and desire, tempered by years of partnership. They explored each other gently, relishing intimacy without urgency, discovering new layers of sensation and devotion with the comfort of shared history. Years later, they rose early to watch the sunrise over the cotton fields. Jonah handed Clara a cup of tea, and she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest as the wind carried the scent of flowers and soil. "You've grown old with me," she said softly. "And I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied. Every touch, her hand on his arm, his fingers brushing her hair, spoke of decades of love, passion, and unwavering devotion. Their kisses were soft, lingering, playful, and sensual in a way that reflected both history and intimacy. It was a love that had survived the impossible, tempered by trust and the comfort of being fully known. Miss Ruth lived long enough to witness their lives intertwined completely. One evening she sat with Clara and Jonah by the fire. "You did something rare," she said, voice trembling. "You loved across every boundary." Clara smiled, leaning against Jonah. "We chose each other," she said softly. "Every time. In every way." Miss Ruth nodded, tears in her eyes. "That is the truest kind of rebellion and the most enduring kind of love." On Clara's deathbed, she reached for Jonah's hand. "Do you regret anything?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He brushed his lips across hers gently. "Nothing," he said. "Not a moment, not a touch, not a danger, not a kiss. Every second was worth it." Their fingers intertwined one last time, the bond unbroken, the love complete. They had never married, never had children, yet their life together was a triumph of choice, intimacy, and enduring passion. Whispers spread outside the manor. Some called Jonah a villain, some Clara a traitor. But inside they knew the truth. They did not own each other. They owned moments, choices, a love carved from impossible circumstances. And that, in 1873 Georgia, was revolution enough.